Let's see. All right, so let's open this up. I think I can give a few updates from some of the long-running tasks, but I guess first we'll open up to any opens that anyone wants to bring up.
Probably want to wait till we go through that review, Sean, but I've got a kind of discussion on the GitHub pull request code review topic with an evaluation of the latest GitHub features.
Okay, nice. Okay, we can go through last week's stuff. I don't think I've seen any updates on the containerized build. I think there is a PR out there. I don't know if anyone else has looked at it. The PR basically changes the CI system to leverage the container, which has a few changes that kind of ripple through some of those Azure pipeline files. I think both Chris and Oliver are still working on a few things, and I think the container repo is probably the right place for that to happen. So if there is feedback, if there is people that want to engage with the container effort, leverage that repo and hopefully we can get something checked in soon to kind of replace some of the fragile parts of the Linux CI system. And then ultimately we will, look into if Windows CI makes sense as well, just to drive consistency and the easy setup. So that's the container status that I'm aware of, unless anyone else is aware of anything. All right. I did work a little bit on a report file format that would basically let you report out the status of a toolchain tag on all the packages, on all the supported architectures. It's a simple markdown file that I think we would basically just have a template maybe checked in, and then we would publish the results at given times, at minimum with the release at a stable tag. But it'd be nice to, if a tool chain was checking more regularly, we could publish more regularly as well. And so I'm trying to figure out how to automate filling in the template results from the CI system. But I will, again, share that on the mailing list in the coming week and see if we can kind of drive that RFC to closure and get the right maintainers and the right tool chains identified. I think at this point we've had the stable tag stable for 2 weeks, and that seems reasonable to start closing up some of these things. Any comments there? Okay. Looking back through, I don't know if I see anything more. I guess there was, Mickey, you had brought up a discussion around some of the CI and binary analysis tools. I know that myself or someone on my team will be looking at CodeQL, which is one provided by GitHub. I think it was a company that was ultimately bought by Microsoft, I think last year. But we are going to start turning that on and hopefully find an easy way to integrate it into the EDK2 build system so that we can have that on there. We've run on some internal projects and found hundreds of reports, as you can imagine, on all static analysis tools. It seems like that's the first result. Many of them are, important, but maybe not critical. A lot of them are size comparisons. And so we're going to start trying to tune that one. But again, I think if other people are making progress on any of the other available static analysis tools, I think that would be great.
Does CodeQL cover C code as well?
It does, yeah.
Okay. Because as you know, there's an RFC about using Coverity.
Yep.
Do you have any summary of the features CodeQL provides relative to Coverity?
So it's a little bit unclear. CodeQL is the paradigm seems like they basically build out some sort of code tree, syntax tree of the language, and then they apply rules to it. So I think there could be a whole bunch of rules created, and I'm assuming that those rules are continuing to be updated, and different sets of rules might be available to different sets of people. So I don't know how that's managed yet. I just know that running through GitHub Actions or DevOps pipelines, you have access to a CodeQL task and the CodeQL service through the VMs that they provide. So I don't know, but I think it would be a good next step would be to get a report of EDK2 and maybe compare that against the Coverity stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I know that one of the challenges we have with Coverity is that we can really only afford to run it once a week from their use limits out there in the size of our code base. So if CodeQL better supports a CI step relative to Coverity, that might be an interesting difference.
Yeah, it does come at a cost. Like it's basically another build. So you probably, we might have to talk about running it like a nightly or something.
Okay.
Or requesting more resources. But yeah, I think it's a good option to see it. I think we definitely could beat the once a week.
Right. Yeah, and the optimal case would be as if it could somehow analyze just the files change as opposed to having to do complete builds, and that's always complicated with static analysis, because if you make a code change to one component that's consumed by 10 or 20 other components, understanding the vulnerabilities based upon all the usages, not just the code change itself, is one of the values you get from the static analysis. And I see Stephen mentioned the Clang one, and yeah, we've looked at that one as well. And the reason why we kind of focused on Coverity as the one that seemed to have the most promise was that not only does it do static analysis, it also provides a database to manage issues with an approved set of developers that can be security focused to evaluate issues and then triage them, and it keeps a full database of that information, and you can mark false positives and then get delta information out from week to week about what things have been resolved and what new things have shown up. So it's a 1-2. It's two things. It's not just static analysis. It's static analysis and full database management of your issues.
Yeah. Well, for the code tracker, it supports the incremental analysis, it's change based. So yeah, like you said, well, this is just an option. I just hope to highlight there's a feature in the code tracker. It supports only analyzes your commit patch, and that feature might be interesting in the CS scenario.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that you can give back to the developer immediately before the commit is huge. Having to wait a week and then get that feedback a week later is it just means you have to bump the developer again to come back and fix issues.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's the latest status on kind of the longer running items we had. Mike, do you want to bring up your GitHub PR stuff?
Yeah, and if it'll let me share with everybody, I've got just a couple of slides with some pictures and stuff that we can look at. And this is really intended to be more of an open discussion, not a necessarily an opinion of mine on which direction to go on this information. But I'm wanting to collect feedback kind of real time from this group, and I'm happy to post the slides on the discussion board that we've got going, Sean. So kind of reviewing it, here we are in June. This first picture, let me know if you can see this sharing or not, everybody.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So this first picture is kind of where we are today with a set of services and how developers interact with them. We're obviously using GitHub as our source repository, and that when a developer has some interesting changes, what they do is they work locally on their development system, and they prepare a branch, usually in a fork of the EDK2 repository or other repositories as needed. But for EDK2 changes, once they have a local branch with a set of changes that are in a state that are ready to review following our review requirements, they submit a pull request against EDK2. And in parallel, they send emails for code review to our current email review process. But the interaction with the services here is that submission of a pull request, number one, kicks off some checks that get run through our CI system, and that's hosted by Azure Pipelines. And we have a pretty good number of checks that look at the health of that code change and provide feedback. And that's item number 3 with which checks pass or fail. And if they fail, you get some good logs that come out of that information. Once the all the checks have passed and all your reviews have passed, then the PR can then have the push label sent, and then that informs the Mergify service, which is a third service that we use, that if all the checks have passed and that push label is set, it can do the rebase merge of the change back into the EDK2 repository, and then give that feedback that was all successful. So from the developer's perspective, if they see everything go through as all green, they'll get back that status. They can see on the pull request that everything was reviewed, the push label was set, all the checks passed, and that Mergify successfully merged the change, and the PR is closed. The other path is if any of the checks fail, then they can go and see that check status is in a failed one, and they can go through the links to Azure Pipelines and look at the logs from Azure Pipelines for what's failed. So Sean, from your understanding here, did I miss anything? Is this a good summary of how this all works today?
Yep, seems good.
Okay. So one of the things I've been working on is if we're going to move to GitHub pull requests for code review, one of the requests we got was to be able to archive all the review activity into an email archive so that we don't lose the historical log of review activity that we have today through the email-based code review. We want to replicate that log of review activity in email. And so after looking at a number of options, we came up with this proposal that what we need is a GitHub webhook that would do this archive activity. So you still see in the lower right here the same boxes you saw in the previous one for the CI. You've got the developer, you got the GitHub service, you've got Azure Pipelines, and you've got Mergify. But now interacting with GitHub are your reviewers and maintainers that are responsible for reviewing the code and would use the GitHub review facilities to do so and to provide final approvals once everything's in good shape. And it's as all that activity occurs by the developer submitting pull requests, resubmitting pull requests, or the reviewers providing feedback, and then the developer responding with comments or responses or code changes. All of those things go through this webhook that's listening for all of those code updates, initial code submissions, and review comments, and is converting those into emails and are sending those emails to an email subscription service. And then those community members that want that archive directly sent to them, they can subscribe to that email subscription service. So the emails are always available by the subscription service if you want to go look at them on an as-need basis, or if you want to have the actual, log local every time a new email is produced, you can subscribe to that and get those emails directly to you. So this was our concept of how we'd replicate the same email archive that we have today through our code review process, but using GitHub web-based review capabilities for the reviewers and the maintainers to do their reviews. So this was the rough proposal and the extra steps in there. But the heart of it is over on the lower right that you saw before for the CI system, and then the interaction of the reviewers and maintainers into GitHub. So kind of taking a step back as requested a few weeks ago to see what's kind of changed. And one of the things I want to highlight is, what are some of the attributes of the source code changes that we see shared on the mailing list today through our current review process? And I think historically what we see is that EDK2 source code changes, the majority of them are split into patch series. It is possible that you'll find some examples of some single patch changes on the EDK2 mailing list that are very small scoped changes. And those do occur, but I'd say the majority of them are broken up into 2 or more patches as part of their formulation by the submitter. And there are reasons for doing it is that changes are not allowed to cross repository boundaries. So sometimes we have some changes to both EDK2 and maybe to EDK2 platforms, and that's one reason for splitting changes into multiple patches. Another one is, as far as a rule we have, is that a single patch is not allowed to cross multiple packages. And that's more to do with we have maintainers and reviewers assigned to different packages, and we want to be able to easily assign the responsible reviewers and maintainers to the patches. So one of our rules is that we're not allowed to have a single set of code changes cross package boundaries. We also recommend that if there's a very complex change, that you want to make it as easy as possible to review those complex changes. So one of the pieces of advice is to try to break up a complex change into smaller chunks to make them easier to review. And some other advice we have is that if you're making interface changes, for example, introducing new protocols, new PPIs, new library classes, or extending the library class, those kinds of things, new PCDs or other things in the DEC file, separate those interface changes from the implementation changes that depend upon those interface changes. So you'd see the changes to the .h files and the DEC files separate from the C file changes that implement the protocol, PPI, or library class. And then the last one is about splitting functional changes from cosmetic or formatting changes. Now, it is true that we've in the last year, we added Encrustify, which was a huge improvement to our automated source formatting of our C code. And that has reduced the number of cases where we'll see cosmetic changes as part of different patches, but it doesn't eliminate them completely, because Encrustify right now covers C code. It doesn't cover any of the other metadata files or assembly files. And also within the rules that Encrustify is following, there may be some things where the developer can do something a little bit different from a format style that Encrustify says is fine either way. So those are harder to discover, but I believe that is a true attribute of the Encrustify tool. So I'll pause there and say, do people agree that this is the reason why we break things up into multiple patches as part of a review, or if there's other reasons that they want to add to this summary.
I mean, technically, we do it for today, patch size, right? Like, I get that goes along with splitting it up to make it easier to review, I think. But
Yeah.
sometimes, even if you split it up, you have to split it further if it's over like 512K or whatever the limit is.
Okay. Yeah, so there's and that limit is due to, is that an email limit or is that a Git patch? I forget which limit where that restriction comes in.
I think it was just an email limit. My understanding it was something to do with like maximum attachment size and like the lowest case denominator of some email clients or something.
Okay. Right. And that may be like groups.io, right, for a size of an email. Okay, that's a good one to put it in account. And that's especially true with new code, right? Where we might have something new that's really big.
Yeah, like a lot of times someone's adding a new package or major feature, you'll see something like that come up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think some of the challenges with the patch series is that if you look at the recommended use of GitHub by GitHub, they have what they call GitHub Flow, which is what they recommend for how you manage and process and review pull requests. And that workflow called GitHub Flow is not optimized for patch series. And there's a whole article about GitHub Flow. You can go look at those in the background and offline and kind of look at those as well. Their basic idea there is that the submitter submits a PR. It will typically be starting point as a single patch. They could potentially, submit multiple if they think that like breaking it up for review scope makes sense. But if there's feedback on the changes, they just tack additional commits onto the end as the review feedback comes in. And in the end, once everything is resolved, all the reviews are approved, any CI checks are done, the typical way of configuring your repository for processing a PR is it'll do squash and merge at the end, which means it takes the complete set of commits, the original ones plus the code fix commits, squashes them all together into a single commit with the summary from the PR as the commit message going into the history for Git. So that's how GitHub Flow and it works well for small changes. In there, I think some of the examples we have in EDK2, that's where we're saying it's when we break up into patch series, we actually want the patch series to survive to be preserved as it goes into the final history for the Git history. The other thing that's interesting about some of the features in GitHub is there is a code owners file that you can optionally put into your repository. And what it does is it helps assign reviewers to a pull request based upon the file changes in the PR. So it's looking at for the entire PR, whether it's 1 commit or 20 commits, it looks at the files modified across the entire PR, will reference the code owner's file that has pattern matching for files and a reviewer or set of reviewers that are associated with each pattern match of files. Very similar to what our maintainers.txt file expresses. And what GitHub will do in response to that presence of that file when a PR is opened, it'll process that file against the PR and then actually assign the reviewers to that pull request. And I said that's scoped at the PR, not at the commit scope, but at the entire PR scope. And there's a link there to that that feature and how it works, and even how it works if there's multiple matches through the file. It's the last rule that fires that matches will be the one that's used. This allows you to organize your code owners file from, for example, we have some of our repositories where something like the stewards may be the kind of the backup for the community as far as listed as maintainers, and then individual packages will then have package specific maintainers and reviewers. And so you can basically, if you list the general ones, kind of your fallback ones earlier in the file, and your more specific ones later in the file, you can replicate how our maintainers.txt works in code owners. So it is possible to translate our existing maintainers.txt into code owners, and that would function correctly, but it would be scoped at the entire PR assignment, not an individual commit assignment. It does not support that feature.
I mean, I don't like, I guess I'm going back and forth on whether that's a bad thing. Because whenever we send cover letters today, we typically do accumulate all the people that we put on the patches to make them aware of the cover letter.
Correct.
And the PR in this case is kind of serving as the cover letter, right? That's the PR description, is describing, if you have a patch series, your individual commit messages would describe your commits, but I would expect that the PR description would describe your overall series. So I guess the only problem here is that you see like the multiple maintainers from different packages possibly like causing a lot of messages in the PR review timeline or something like that.
Right, and you don't know, just because you've been assigned to the PR, and if there's multiple commits in it, you don't know which of the commits you're responsible for reviewing.
Okay. Yeah, because you're saying you're just going to show up, you're going to see a bunch of files changed at the PR level, and then finding a subset that might apply to you is the concern there. Okay.
Right, you put the burden on the reviewer to find which commits they need to review.
Then as part of GitHub Flow, one thing that we've done with GitHub PRs is we allow two strategies for merging. One is squash, which would squash all the commits into one and then use the PR message, as you're saying. And then the other one is rebase and fast forward, where it preserves the commits and the individual commit messages and puts that into the Git history. Are you proposing, it sounds like, to do rebase and fast forward only in this case, right? So you want to preserve the commits, but in that case, I was a little confused about what you meant by the PR message overwriting the commit messages, because that wouldn't normally happen in a rebase and fast forward strategy.
You're correct. The default GitHub flow, I think, as I see documented by GitHub, is squash and merge. You can configure or make it selectable which one you do on submission. I think when you do squash and merge, the PR summary becomes the commit message. If you do the rebase fast forward, the summary in the PR is not part of the Git history, and then the individual commit messages from the individual commits become part of the Git history.
Yeah, that's right. And like I said, we allow both. So we let the person who has write access to the repo, which is the person who can merge PRs, they make the decision about whether to squash or rebase and fast forward. Typically, if the contributor wants their series to be rebase and fast forward, like they intentionally split their commits in a way that they want them to go into the history, we'll have them put a tag in the PR title that says R, like rebase and FF. And
Yep.
if the person sees that, then they'll at least consider it for rebase and fast forward. If there's a problem, they'll let them know. But yeah, I think we've found success using both cases. Some people do find it very convenient to just push a bunch of stuff to the PR and then let it get squashed too. So both have worked out for us.
Right, and I'm not making any suggestions on this slide. I'm just kind of giving some background of what are some of the historical attributes of EDK2 development and review, and what some of the challenges are with the default GitHub features. And I agree there is some options on definitely some options on GitHub on how you can use it. Going on to what are kind of our options that we can consider here for EDK2 in migrating from an email-based code review system to a PR-based code review system. And once again, this is kind of taking a step back to say, let's make sure we summarize and look at all of the possible review methodologies we could attempt, and what are the kind of the pros and cons of each, and what makes the most sense for us going forward. So to me, the first one to look at is basically, our historical breaking things up into multiple commits. Don't do that. Effectively just, single commit per change by default. Use GitHub flow as is with code owners and squash as merge as the default policy. I think that's good for small changes that don't cross repo or package boundaries. But it is not clear in more complex changes how reviewers would know what to review. So your reviewer assignment with the way we have our reviewers allocated based on a package basis becomes challenging for the reviewers to figure out how to do that, and for the submitter to know when the review's actually complete from that. So that's kind of that one. So that's definitely an option, right? We can think about that, pros and cons of basically adopt GitHub flow as is.
So Mike, one thought, I guess I don't actually see that as I'm not actually advocating necessarily for that model, but I don't necessarily see that challenge being that big of a deal. As Michael mentioned, I think if you're reviewing, if you're a maintainer for a file that's in a larger change set, you're on the hook to kind of look at the whole change set to see if it makes sense, understand it. And yes, you may be especially on the hook for a certain file. But I think you would know what those files are, or you should at least as a maintainer, and be able to, do your review. I would actually hope that if you did the review on the PR, you do it on the whole thing, not just the files that you were maintainer, because obviously as a maintainer, you're an important asset to the project, and your feedback on all the files are useful.
Yeah, it's the not knowing when the review's complete is a little bit challenging. So let's say you have some changes that cover multiple packages. So getting 2 reviews, like if you have a default policy of two reviews must be completed in order for it to be even considered for merging. But when you start having multiple packages involved, now I have to go through as a submitter and make sure that I see that the maintainers for each of the packages that are in my submitted change have each responded affirmatively with a approval.
So another way we handle that is now this isn't in GitHub, but it's in, I don't know if GitHub has a similar feature or not, but in ADO at least, we assign groups to specific file paths, and then we make it a requirement that the group must have an approval. And so in this case, each package could be a group. And whenever you create the PR, it would say, well, you touch these packages, which means that these groups are added as required reviewers to your PR. So you would see, oh, I touched 3 packages. Now I see 3 required groups are there. Then all you need is that group to give you an approval. So the people in that group are notified. Someone comes and reviews it, and you see, oh, okay, that group gave me an approval. Now I'm just waiting for the other 2 groups. So in that case, it's very clear who you need to approve and what the status is. I just don't know if GitHub has a similar feature to group people and assign them to PRs like that.
It's got teams. You can assign teams, but I don't know if you can set a policy on PRs where you can vary the number of team approvals required for a PR to be considered, mergeable.
There is a checkbox, and I haven't used it, that says the code owners must approve. And so I would think that that would follow a similar policy here.
Okay.
I'd really like to see that. I think it's extremely nice and clear whenever you can see what groups were assigned and what the status of those groups are. It helps a lot. It's also kind of nice because it helps handle the fluidity of who's in the group. So instead of having to maintain individuals that are being added and removed to PRs,
Yep.
you can just let the groups be added and removed, and as people are moved in and out of the groups, it keeps working the same way.
Yeah, it adds some burden to manage the team's information correctly, but that there's always trade-offs on all these things.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more comments on the first one? Okay, we'll move on to the second one. The second one is, the places where we've historically broken a change into multiple commits, break those into multiple PRs. So you get basically a single PR per change. We get to use the GitHub flow as is with code owners and squash and merge for those, because it was always intended to be a single commit from the beginning. So even if you get feedback on one PR, it ends up some code changes, those can be tacked on for that PR, but you intend them to all be, squashed in on that one. You end up with some odd things that if for some patch series, you'll see submitters reformulate their patch series. So let's say it started with 4 patches, but they got feedback. You need to break it up in a little bit more into maybe 6 patches. So that reformulation thing gets more complicated. If you aren't reformulating, I think this maps in okay. If you reformulate, you may have to start over and resubmit your reformulated series into a new set of PRs and close the old ones, something like that. But the idea is that each commit is its own PR. It uses GitHub flow as is, and the code owner's assignments for each commit and the squash and merge for each one of those PRs. I think there are some challenges for everyone to understand that there's actually a group of related PRs. I know that there's some ways to reference PRs from other PRs to show that there's those relationships in some of the comments in there, or if you tie it with issues, you can potentially track those together. You also then have to make sure that they're ordered correctly, because usually when we submit these things as a series, they are in a specific order with the intent that you should be able to pass CI as each patch or each commit is processed in the history, which allows for some debug techniques such as bisection to be able to find where an escape was introduced. So keeping them ordered correctly is very important, and that's also potentially hard to do within the current GitHub PR system. So it also, I think, if you look at then your history of PRs on the project over a long period of time, you'll have a significant number of increase in the total number of PRs in the system that are there and built up in that database over time. May or may not be an issue, but it is something to at least consider as far as looking at what this means. So this is just flat PRs that are, I think, by default unrelated, and we have to figure out ways to relate them and order them, is this second option. And in doing some searching and trying to understand that specific problem of how do you group and order them correctly, there are some concepts called stacked PRs, or another term I've seen used is, I think, dependent. Is another name for them. And the idea is that you do a single commit per branch, with branches from branches for each commit. So your first commit is branched from master. Your second commit is branched from that branch. Your third commit is branched from that branch, and so on and so on. I think that's okay for just a small number of changes. You get to some of our examples in the EDK2 where at the limit, we've seen things in the 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus commits, which are outliers. They don't happen very often, but the idea of having that many branches you're trying to manage, and then if you get feedback that you have to make a code change on one of your commits, you have to propagate and rebase all of your dependent branches from that point forward. So it does have a significant increase, I think, in the way the developer manages the code changes locally to set them up. And then when they do that rebase, they have to resubmit everything up through GitHub for as individual PRs with make sure they're all pointed at the right dependent base, the previous branch and things like that. So it's not simple, but at least it captures the relationship in the order of the PRs.
Yeah, I've done that before. I wouldn't recommend it. It gets really messy if you need to change it. I think, as you mentioned at some point in there, because if you want to inject like a new PR in the middle of those PRs, and it becomes messy. And then if you're trying to change the PRs overall, you're just having to push to so many different places. It becomes a lot of overhead managing all those branches.
Yeah, it screams for more developer tools is what it screams for at that point.
Yeah. Yes.
So, okay. So then we're into the ones that are closer to the direction that we've been exploring so far on this. The first one is the idea of if we have a patch series, that we open up one PR per patch series. And then if we need to make changes to it based upon feedback or reformulation of it, that we close that old PR and open a new PR for those code changes. What this then requires as far as the maintainers and reviewers is that they need to perform the review at the commit scope instead of the PR scope. They're welcome to do it at the PR scope if they want to do that too, and then like provide a like series reviewed by for the entire PR. But for their individual responsibility for the commits that have separate assignments for reviewers and maintainers at the single commit scope, they need to make sure that they reviewed that at that scope and that the whole PR is, as Sean mentioned before, makes sense as a whole as well. What that implies a bit is that since GitHub does not have a built-in facility to assign reviewers or maintainers at the commit scope, that's where we need to extend GitHub, and that's their mechanism for extending is a webhook. So that's where a webhook is required to assign the reviewers and maintainers for each commit. And the other observation I have is that when you leave review comments at the commit scope, those are the things that appear to lose history as there are reformulations of the content, even if you're opening a new PR. What I think is and I'd have to go do the experiment to verify again, but if you have a commit that's part of a PR and there's review conversation there, and then you open up a new PR that you then push, a new version of that same commit with no code changes, I can't remember, you might lose the review comments because it's a fresh push of the same SHA or not. That's where GitHub is a little, not as robust, it appears, as at this commit scope review content. I think at the PR scope, all the information is preserved. And I don't know if anybody has any other experiences on that PR scope versus commit scoped review comment information. But it is going to be worthwhile for me to at least verify where I've seen information lost before, what is the scenario of which information is lost. And that's where, you know, another reason for the email archive came up was that the GitHub notifications, email notifications by default, do not provide the full context of the changes. They provide you a go look at the change here on the web, more of a notification that a change did occur and you have to go over to the web to see it. So you don't have, you know, in the end, the full history there. And that's where the email archive is to provide that full context. The side effect of opening a new PR for any code change, it does increase your total number of PRs in the history of your project, because you end up with a number of, for each, like you have like a V1 of your series, V2 of your series, V3 of your series. Those earlier versions become abandoned, and only the final one is the one that actually is the one that's merged in and closed normally. And then the derivative of this, in order to address that number of abandoned PRs, is to do one PR per patch series. And if you do have code changes, do a forced push to the same PR branch. And then you're always working within the scope of the single assigned PR number from GitHub. You still are performing the reviews at the commit scope. For assignment, you have to have the webhook that helps assign the reviewers and the maintainers, and I think you still need the email archive because of the scenarios where some information is lost. And the one attribute that's better than the previous one is that it does reduce the total number of PRs in the history of the project. So this last one is what we had settled on before when we looked at the GitHub capabilities as they were when we started the development of the webhook. And so really the goal today was at least to kind of re-review what are the attributes of our code development and, you know, enumerate the options. If does anybody have other options they want us to put onto this list of ways to do our review of EDK2 code changes within the GitHub review system?
Just to clarify, the last one here only makes sense if you're tracking approvals through commit messages and not through PR approvals, right? Or otherwise you're just going to keep losing all of your approval information every time there's a new PR created.
Correct. Yes, you track it through comments on the review, which also is so that's another good point. So the webhook. It's true for both of these because it's at the commit scope.
So Mike, I think the reason you lose the information, and I think the reason that you need the webhook for this approval part, is because you're pushing commits that change, right? Because even if you add the reviewed by, you just change the commit.
In the end, so that final reviewed by, yes, and that may lose the conversation that occurred. It is very, very interesting. When you add the reviewed by, it actually changes the hash of that commit.
Yep.
So the previous hash does exist, and it's in the Git repository as part of the PR, you know, part of the tracking information that's in the repository. It's not clear what garbage collection occurs by GitHub on commits that are effectively orphaned. Right, and that's another challenge here, that it's not clear to me. I've seen some comments that there may be, at a pretty long period of time, some garbage collection that occurs on our orphaned items.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so I guess I would want to put forward an idea that we we did a 1 PR per patch series. We used force pushes, but we tried to use the code owners file to assign required reviewers, and we tried to use GitHub reviews to track approvals, and the GitHub comments to track open changes that need to be resolved. So there's a way to say that all comments must be marked resolved before a PR can be closed.
Let's see. I think. Sorry. Let me.
Yeah, it's similar to that one, right?
Yeah. Let me. Here. Continue.
Yeah,
this.
that's the same one I was thinking of as well. So
Yeah.
as we were going through, like, you know, the various challenges and how we'd overcome them, I think that combines a lot of the ways we'd look at doing that.
So this is use code owners to assign reviewers, maintainers to PR, right? Is that,
Yep.
Because it'll do that, you know, based on file changes.
Yep.
Okay, so then maintainers or reviewers and maintainers. Responsible for finding commits they are responsible for, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would again go back and say I think you're required or you're responsible for the entire PR, and you can take that responsibility more seriously for the files that you generally own. But I think you should take that duty. You know.
So a approved response means approval of entire PR, right? Is what they're saying, right? Means they did a review of the commits they own, and they did the review of the entire PR as a set as far as how it fits in. They may not have been technically responsible for some of the commits, but they agreed that they looked okay from the part that they owned.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good thing because it puts a little more focus on the integration of some of these things.
I mean, there's an idea around you can, when you approve or deny or block a PR, you can request a change, or you can just add a comment, right? And so I could imagine maybe there'd be a pattern where if something in your own package that you were maintainer for was not acceptable, you would actually block the PR. And if something was in someone else's package, but you thought it probably wasn't the appropriate thing, you could put a comment into the PR that said, you know, you don't think this is appropriate, please address, but you don't necessarily have to block the PR. And again, all comments have to be resolved before a PR can be closed.
Right, yeah.
So you might be able to, and again, that would rely on everyone following the rules, but you might be able to rely on a system like that.
Right, okay. And I think, Michael, I like the idea that if we can take advantage of the code owners to assign teams based upon the packages modified, that may, and then that other checkbox, if that can help force that the number of teams that have to approve the PR that is dynamic based upon the number of packages modified, that would be a good facility to take advantage of, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm going to also see if I can post a picture here. I don't think this will be as complicated as it seems for the maintainers to find what they're responsible for. Like, this is using the VS Code plugin for GitHub, and I'm looking at the EDK2 PRs right now. And if you got that image, I found a PR that is crossing several packages at the moment, and you can see it's pretty clear which files go to which package there. So like you can see, oh, this PR is touching these packages, and if I want to see the files in my package, I just need to expand it. This is actually the way I review stuff on this is the way I review stuff on EDK2 now, because I just find it so much easier. than looking at the email. So I generally will just bring the branch up in the PR view in VS Code, and then I'll go look at the files through here. And if you see the top of the plugin, it actually will tell you which PRs you have assigned to you, which PRs you created, which PRs are waiting for a maintainer to merge, and then these are all the open PRs. So it's way easier to keep track of where changes are than going and digging through your email or checking, the EDK2 history to see if something you submitted got merged.
Right. Yeah, I'm aware that even to the web interface, there's better facilities to go find the things that you're working on, and then these plugins in like Visual Studio Code are also very powerful to help us once we're in GitHub as the review facility.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to mainly show here that I don't think the package separation is going to be that big of a deal. It's pretty easy to see the split in the PR.
Okay. Yeah, it's I guess one of the historical challenges we have with the EDK2 community is lack of response on reviews. So, if you're the submitter and you're waiting for review from a specific team or maintainer or reviewer, getting them, nudging them to go look at their stuff is I'm not sure how you do that through the GitHub services.
I've seen a lot of projects basically have tags, and I think you can even use code owners to assign tags. And then you clear out your tag when someone from your team has approved that PR. So then you have some really easy filtering to do to find all the projects that the MDE module maintainers need to watch, or if we break it down to like Dixie core maintainers or however we decide to break that down.
Okay.
You can do something like that.
Yeah, I usually just like do at whoever's name or at group name, and then it sends a notification to them. I'll be like, at whoever, review this.
Okay.
I even do that now in some of our EDK2 PRs. Like if I put it up, I'll just notify someone that they need to come merge it or whatever in there.
Okay.
And I,
So
and I
that-
think those are the
I was gonna say
reasons
that-
why I was trying to look at how to avoid as much functionality in the webhook as possible, is because it opens you up to all these other tools and workflows and plugins and stuff. But the more things we do private into our webhook, the less those tools apply to us.
Right. So I removed those two webhook features of assigning reviewers, maintainers, and tracking approvals. Now, what's not clear to me is I knew that the webhook, if you're doing this forced push, the webhook, once it has all the approvals, could generate the reviewed by, tested by, act by, lines based upon the approvals that it saw in comments, and generate the revised version of the commit messages and do a forced push from the webhook with those tags added. Once it's convinced the review is complete, may require one of the maintainers to say, yes, the webhook, please go do that step. But whether that's a manual or an automatic thing, that was one of the things I could see that we would help simplify the flow, is by having the webhook do that. Without the webhook doing that and tracking that, I'm not sure how the webhook would, how we'd get all those reviewed bys, act bys, tested bys into the commit log. What's your thoughts on that, Sean?
I mean, my first thought is that instead of looking at the commit logs when you want to thank your community for being, an active member, you'd look through the PR statistics. I know that won't make everybody happy, right? But I think,
I think what I've heard is that it's the fact that it's a permanent part of the Git history is what the reviewers and participants are wanting to see, such that that's their permanent information that they participated actively in that project.
Yeah, but honestly, I know we've had this conversation for years, so I guess I'm curious how recent you've had that, because if you look nowadays, a lot of times, you know, as someone who hires people, I look at their GitHub history. And you can see all this kind of stuff through their GitHub history now, right? And that's kind of becoming the way that you get credit for the work you do.
Okay.
So if that's really the angle, like I find it easier to go to GitHub and see it across all sorts of projects rather than actually have to check out code. And actually, I don't even know what tools I would use to scan all commit messages to find where they've done a reviewed by, right?
I mean, if we did want to do that, it seems like there would be like a REST API or something that we could do to just add those tags based on the PR information into the commit. Is that something?
No,
that
you have to do the force push with the edited commit message because it's a different SHA.
like as part of the merging process, you're saying?
Yeah, it's like once you're into the approval state, you'd have the webhook bot generate the modified commit messages in a branch and do a force push of the branch with the modified commit messages.
Okay. But why is that a problem? And then you merge that?
It's that complexity, you know, thing that Sean's bringing up, that everything, you know, anything we add to the webhook increases a point of failure, right? Potential point of failure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm completely on board with tracking everything through GitHub. I just didn't think it'd be that difficult to add some of that in there.
So I think it's a valid open to go through, right, Sean, is R, RB, AB, PB tags in Git commit history. Still required if they are available through GitHub PR history, right? That's your question, right? It is going to be there in the except that the information is lossy, right? Somebody does an AB or a TB, you know, on an earlier version, and you do that, you know, see at the commit scope, at the PR scope, they should be preserved, right, Sean?
Right.
Even across a force push, you'll still see them in the history.
Yep, they should still be there. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Now the strategy for this proposal here is rebase and fast forward, right? Because you're saying one PR per patch series. Okay.
Yes. No squash and merge, right?
Yeah, I think we might need to capture that in here somewhere.
Okay. And actually, all three of these are that same style. It's the rebase.
Okay.
That's what you mean, right?
Yeah.
All three of these are in that same style.
It's really the only one that makes sense if we're saying we're going to allow like patch series to be split up by commit in the PR and a single PR.
Yep.
So on your last comment there, I guess I would just add the additional context that to get that support requires sacrifice somewhere else, right? Like that's, again, the only reason we're pushing back here is that it doesn't come for free. If we could get a way for this to come for free, like great. And I think, you know, we talked about Mergify, since that is one way to do the auto merging. They might be able to jump in and run some custom code, but I think GitHub at the moment doesn't give us any custom hook that we can catch on that merge point.
Right. Yeah. But I think this still does require maybe the email archive, because there's because of the lost information across the force pushes. So that may be the one thing that the webhook still has to do.
I mean, it should still be on. Again, the force push shouldn't matter because it's all associated with the PR. So the PR should have that context that somebody approved a PR. Now there is no tested by and whatever the AB tag is for, but there is no concept of that. You either approve, I guess you can just submit comments against it, but you don't actually give it a review. You either approve or block it, right?
Yeah, our current rules for reviews and where ACTBY comes in, it's a little nuanced. if two maintainers provide a reviewed by, you're done. Okay, for at the scope of the commit in today's email review. If a reviewer, not a maintainer, provides a reviewed by, and the maintainer does an act by, what the maintainer is saying, I trust that reviewer, and that that maintainer is effectively approving that commit. So it is possible, for example, for both maintainers to say act by, and that a single maintainer to do an act by and two reviewers do reviewed bys, and then that's good. So there is no requirement that the maintainer actually do the review if they trust somebody else and provide an act by. So those states are not something that GitHub supports today, I think, as far as their approval process.
Right.
Well, you could have like the maintainer only approve if they see that someone else approved that they trust, and kind of get that mostly, right?
So you may have to like use tags instead of like we use the push labels. You may have to have the reviewer may have to do basically an act by label, but I don't know if we can have a way to block the merge until the maintainer does either an approval or an act by label.
I think the maintainer would have to, since they're going to be in the team that can do the actual approval, they would have to say, I see, this person has done a review and I value their review, therefore I'm approving. And then hit the approve button, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the maintainer, and I think, should always have to approve, regardless of why they're approving, whether they feel confident reviewing it themselves or they trust someone else.
I think that's the other open, right?
Yeah. I think we were proposing that they just approve it basically as their act by, right? That was like one variation of that.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I know we're way over time. I'm sorry about that for everybody that's still online, but I think it's been a valuable discussion. And as I said, I just wanted to get this stuff out there and enumerated, not necessarily make a decision today. I think there's some more things to explore here and maybe follow up next week or the week after.
Sounds great. I appreciate the work putting into this.
And I'll generate I don't know how, can I do an attachment on that conversation?
I believe you can attach attachments to them. Yes, you might actually start a new discussion though. This is a pretty focused and could be a long running discussion. So it might make sense to have a new discussion topic just for this.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Anything from anyone else before we close out? All right. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you next week.
Everybody.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.